Three things happened this week that should terrify you, and none of them are getting the attention they deserve. The first one involves the planet, not metaphorically, literally. Because what the Trump administration just did to environmental protections isn't just a policy shift. It's a demolition job, deliberate, systematic, and moving so fast that the people whose job it is to stop it are still trying to figure out where to start. The second involves Pam Bondi, the woman who is supposed to be America's top law enforcement officer, the woman who stood in front of Congress and delivered what can only be described as a masterclass in strategic amnesia. Except the files existed, the records existed, and everyone in that room knew it. The third involves ICE, and the Democrats who finally decided that demanding reform isn't optional anymore. But here's the question nobody is asking. Is it too late? And does it matter if the machinery is already in motion? Let's start with the planet, because this one isn't slow. This one is fast. When the Trump administration announced it was pulling back from the Paris Climate Agreement on day one, most people treated it like a rerun. They'd seen this before. First term, same playbook, pull out of the agreement, claim economic necessity, move on. But this time is different, and the difference matters enormously. The first time, there was institutional resistance. Career officials inside the EPA who understood the science and quietly slowed the rollback. Legal challenges that tied up regulatory changes for years. International pressure that kept certain commitments partially alive, even without formal participation. This time, those guardrails are gone. The career officials who provided internal friction have been replaced or driven out. The legal infrastructure for challenging rollbacks has been deliberately weakened, and the administration isn't just withdrawing from agreements, it's actively dismantling the domestic regulatory framework that underpinned those commitments in the first place. The numbers are staggering. In the first 60 days of this administration, the EPA moved to roll back or eliminate over 40 environmental regulations. Not slow walk them, eliminate them, clean air standards that took decades to build, water quality protections that millions of Americans depend on, methane emission rules that the energy sector had already begun adapting to. And here's what makes this different from standard deregulation. The people driving this don't see it as a cost-benefit trade-off, they see it as a philosophical correction. The idea that federal regulation of environmental impact is itself illegitimate, that the market should determine what is acceptable pollution, that the science of climate damage is either wrong or irrelevant to policy. That belief system, held by the people now running the agencies that are supposed to protect the environment, is not a policy position that can be negotiated with. It's a fundamental rejection of the premise that government has a role in this space at all. And that is what desperate looks like. Not chaotic, not disorganized, desperate and purposeful. Because they know the window is limited. They know courts will eventually push back. They know public opinion is not with them on this. So the goal isn't to build a lasting regulatory framework. The goal is to tear down as much of the existing one as possible before anyone can stop it. The planet is not burning yet, but the infrastructure that was slowing the burn is being dismantled in real time. Now let's talk about Pam Bondi, because this one is personal. The hearing started like most congressional hearings, procedural. Slow. The kind of thing that generates clips but rarely produces consequences. And then someone pulled out a document. The question was simple. The kind of question that shouldn't require 4 minutes of careful non-answers. It was about the Epstein files. About the timeline of decisions made regarding the release of those files. About what the Attorney General's office knew, when they knew it, and what they decided to do about it. Bondi's answer was a performance. Technically fluent, emotionally controlled, completely disconnected from the documentary record that the questioner was holding in their hand. Here's what made it a denial-thon and not just a hearing. It wasn't one denial, it was a cascade. Systematic, methodical, and rehearsed. Each question met with a variant of the same non-answer. I'm not familiar with that specific document. I'd have to review the timeline. That decision was made at a staff level. I don't have that information in front of me. The problem with that approach, the reason it generates the reaction it does, isn't that it's legally risky, it's that it's visibly, obviously, documentably false. And the people asking the questions knew it, and Bondi knew they knew it, and everyone watching knew that everyone in that room knew it. That's the denial-thon format. Not one moment of evasion, an entire hearing of it, carefully constructed evasion stacked on top of carefully constructed evasion until the questioner runs out of time and the record moves on without a real answer. But here's what Bondi and her team may have miscalculated. Congressional hearings create records. Those records get cross-referenced with other records, and the Epstein file question isn't going away because the people asking it are not asking casually, they are building something. And every non-answer is a brick in that structure. The specific exchange that stopped the room involved a timeline. A documented timeline of decisions made inside the Justice Department regarding which portions of the Epstein files would be released, which would be redacted, and why. The questioner had that timeline. Bondi said she didn't recognize it. She was the Attorney General. Her name was referenced in it. That moment, that specific disconnect between what the document showed and what the woman who was supposedly running the department said she knew is the moment that turned a routine oversight hearing into something that legal analysts are still picking apart. Not because it proved wrongdoing. It didn't, not in the moment, but because it demonstrated in real time in front of cameras exactly the kind of institutional behavior that the Epstein files represent, the careful management of what the public is allowed to know. The systematic deployment of procedural language to avoid substantive accountability. The use of government authority to protect information that the public has a right to. Bondi walked out of that hearing claiming victory. Her team called it a successful performance. And in the narrow tactical sense, maybe it was. She didn't collapse under questioning. She didn't contradict herself catastrophically in a single exchange. She got through it. But getting through it isn't the same as resolving it. And the files still exist. The timeline still exists, and the next hearing is already being scheduled, which brings us to ICE, and to the Democrats who have decided that demanding reform is no longer a position they can avoid. The political calculus around immigration enforcement has shifted. The numbers that are coming out of ICE operations in the past several months are not the numbers that can be absorbed quietly. The scope of deportation operations, the conditions in detention facilities, the cases of individuals with no criminal record and deep community ties being removed after decades in the country, these are no longer abstract policy debates. They are stories, specific, documented, photographed, and filmed stories. And those stories have created a political reality that Democratic leadership can no longer manage by saying, we support orderly enforcement while opposing the extremes, because the extremes are no longer at the margins. The extremes are the policy. The calls for ICE reform coming from congressional Democrats this week are more specific than anything that's come before. Not abolish ICE, not eliminate enforcement. Reform the operational standards. Require documented legal justification for each detention. Establish minimum conditions requirements for facilities. Create an independent oversight mechanism with actual authority. Those are not radical demands. They are the kind of institutional accountability requirements that apply to every other law enforcement agency in the country. The argument that they're somehow inappropriate when applied to immigration enforcement has always been a political argument, not a legal or procedural one. But here's where the Democrats face their own credibility problem. For years, when they had the power to force these changes, they didn't. When they controlled the chamber, when they had the votes, when they had the political moment, they chose not to spend that capital on immigration enforcement reform. They calculated that the issue was too complicated, too divisive, too likely to generate the kind of backlash that costs seats. And now they're demanding reform from a position of zero institutional power. And the people making decisions about ICE operations have exactly zero incentive to listen. That's not cynicism. That's the mechanics of legislative power. You spend capital when you have it, or you watch someone else spend it on things you hate. The demand for ICE reform is right. The timing of the demand, the circumstances under which it's arriving, the position from which it's being made, all of that is a problem. Not because the demand is wrong, because the demand is too late to be anything other than messaging. And messaging, when people are being detained, when families are being separated, when communities are losing people they've known for decades, messaging is not enough. Here's what connects all three of these stories. And this is the part that nobody in the mainstream coverage is tying together. The environmental rollback, the Epstein Denial-Thon, the ICE operations, and the late Democratic response to them, they are all products of the same institutional reality. The systematic dismantling of accountability structures that was years in the making and is now moving at a pace that the remaining accountability structures can't match. The EPA officials who would have pushed back from inside are gone. The oversight mechanisms that would have slowed the environmental rollback have been weakened. The oversight hearing where Bondi performed her Denial-Thon produced a transcript and will produce another hearing and may eventually produce something consequential. But the files she wasn't familiar with will remain managed by the people who manage them. And the ICE operations will continue because the people running them have concluded, correctly based on recent history, that democratic outrage does not translate into operational constraint. This is not a pessimistic reading. It's an accurate one. Because the first step in actually changing any of these situations is understanding exactly what they are and exactly what they require to change. The planet is not beyond saving, but the window is narrowing because the infrastructure for slowing the damage is being systematically removed. The Epstein files are not permanently buried, but getting to them requires a sustained, document-based effort that goes beyond hearing room performance. ICE reform is not impossible, but it requires the kind of sustained political commitment that converts into institutional change and not just statements. What happened this week wasn't random. It wasn't coincidental. It was three manifestations of the same underlying dynamic. Power moving fast in one direction while accountability moves slow in every other. The question isn't whether you're paying attention. You're here, you're watching. The question is what paying attention leads to. Because attention without consequence is just an audience. And right now, the people making these decisions are not worried about the audience. They're counting on the audience staying an audience. The next 60 days matter more than most people realize. The environmental rollback has a legal challenge timeline that closes if certain filings aren't made. The Epstein hearing record is being assembled in ways that may produce something real if the follow-through is there. And the ICE reform debate is about to collide with a budget cycle that could actually create leverage if the people demanding reform are willing to use it. Watch what happens next, not because drama is coming, though it is, but because the decisions made in the next 60 days will determine whether any of these three stories ends differently than the pattern suggests they will. Stay close. Because this is not the end of any of these stories. It's the part where the choices that actually matter get made.